Howdy folks, Shell Presto here. It's February, or Februfairy. Who is coming up with these things? Alright, for Februfairy, it's Artful Alley and Sketching a Fairy over on Instagram, and I will link to them in the description. But really, it's starting to feel like there's a new big challenge every month, and I don't know about you guys, but I can't keep pace with that. So I did not draw 28 fairies this month. I didn't even draw 10. I drew 2.5 so far. We'll see if we can make it 3 by the end of the month. And one of them was for an online magazine, so I'm saving that video for March 1st when the magazine comes out on DriveThruRPG, because then I can link to it. And it all works out well then. And let me tell you that that drawing is spectacular. This drawing is actually pretty old now. There are some things wrong with it here and there, and I'm a better artist now, but I still really like the pose and expression and flow of the drawing. So here I am, 5 years later, inking and painting it. Now, I ain't gonna tell you the little things that I can see that are wrong with this piece 5 years later. Many artists, including me, and possibly you, feel a deep urge to apologize for their art. Have you ever done that? Finished a piece of art, wanted to show it to someone, but before or as you're showing it to them, you say something like, "The legs are too long, and the one eye is kinda low, and the neck is too short, but..." Because if you're like that, stop it. I said that a little harshly, and I didn't say it harshly for some frivolous reason like, "It's annoying when people do that," or "I can't stand when good artists act like their work isn't good." I'm actually very sympathetic toward that feeling. Showing your art to someone can feel like asking someone holding a shaker of salt, a bottle of vinegar, and a Band-Aid to take a look at a cut on your hand. You hope they're going to come at you with the Band-Aid, but that vinegar or salt in the wound is potentially an option too. Sharing your art is personal and vulnerable, and hearing someone say they don't like it can actually hurt. So I totally understand wanting to preempt what a viewer might say by pointing it out yourself first. But don't. Don't do it. Resist the urge. Because one of the biggest disservices you can do yourself and your art is ruining a viewer's perception of a piece before they see it for themselves. Because the truth is, you are probably your harshest critic. Unless you're showing the piece to another artist with a critical eye, or you're married to my husband and showing it to him, the person you're showing it to probably won't see all your mistakes. Or they may see different ones, but not the ones you would point out. It's worth noting, too, that while DiBaggio is my toughest critic, he's also my biggest fan, and probably the #1 reason why I've improved so much in the past 8 years or so. And know that there are stylistic qualities to art that make it entirely possible and likely probable that an artist who is more skilled than you are can find something they really like about your art. Otherwise, everyone would only like art that looks like the art they themselves draw, and that just ain't reality. You devalue your own art by pointing out the flaws in it. Because art is subjective. I love Chris Bachalo's art. He's a Marvel Comics artist and did a number of runs on X-Men and another of my favorite books, Generation X. Back when he did Generation X, his proportions were certainly good, but also all over the place. Lots of things got over-exaggerated. Super skinny arms, sometimes faces didn't look the same from one panel to the other if the angle changed. Sometimes things were way too rounded or exaggerated. There were a lot of, you could call them flaws in his art if you looked for them. But on the whole, the entire picture, the entire page was just beautiful. Everything he drew was stylized, and stylized awesomely. If it was an action scene, every pose was pushed to its limit, every panel full of energy. He used darks and lights so well. Sure, sometimes you couldn't see half of what was in the panel because it was so dark, but you didn't care because it captured the mood so wonderfully. It filled you with excitement or made you gasp as a chill ran down your spine. Really and truly, who cared if the character's nose was longer in this panel, when the whole feeling of the page, the creepy mood of the situation, is so well conveyed? But, and we're no longer talking about Chris Bichello here, but if you point out that, for example, this nose is weird, or that hand isn't very well drawn, or even something really bad like, I only gave her 3 fingers, you ruin the feeling of a piece before the viewer can experience it. And believe me, I've seen awesome artists sell fantastic prints where they've accidentally given someone 6 fingers, or 4 fingers, or 2 left hands. And people still buy it and don't care, and probably never notice, because the eyes, or the pretty face, or the overall pose, or the entire feel of the piece is what attracts their eye. But you should still remember to make sure everyone has the right number of fingers and that their thumbs are on the correct side of their hand for that arm anyway. This particular piece isn't meant to wow anyone or invoke some swell of emotion, but still, it's more enjoyable if I don't hamstring someone's enjoyment of it with an apology for it being a practice piece. And yes, I know that by saying that, I'm therefore going against my own advice because I pointed it out, but I'm saying it for your benefit and learning experience. I wouldn't say it when I'm sharing it on social media or showing it to someone in person. I knew I was going to be drawing Ruby again soon, and as it turned out, twice more, so I thought I'd try to get a bit of her coloration worked out since I've never drawn her in color before. I also got a new set of watercolors, the Primo Watercolor Confections Tropical set, and I knew I wanted to use that set to paint her, so I wanted to try them out. Now, this isn't a review, by the way. I never review any material my first time trying them, because it can take a while to get a feel for the materials, and I wouldn't want to give a first impression that isn't a lasting impression. But I will say that I like these Prima Watercolor Confections Tropical paints very much so far. Now, Ruby's skin is darker than I intended. Ruby, who is half Fae, and her mother, who is 100% Fairy, have very light skin, and I had wanted to tint her skin either slightly yellow or orange, or just a little unnaturally pink. I wasn't sure what color I was going to go with. Not a that's weird color, but just enough to give the feeling that something's not fully right about them, an almost unnatural vibrance. But when it's your first time trying a watercolor set, fine-tuning your color selection is not going to happen. And that's why I worked on an older piece with no background like this. I like this drawing, but I wasn't going to be devastated if I screwed it up. And it didn't turn out 100% how I wanted it to, so yeah, I screwed it up a little. That's why we practice. I had gotten too much purple from the shadows into the midtones when I started shading her skin, and the purple wasn't warm enough, so it sort of grayed out and dulled her skin. I certainly didn't want that, so I went in with a light wash of orange, and while it warmed up her skin color, it also made her look less fair than I wanted. It's still very pretty, and it could work for some other character, but it's not what I intended for Ruby. I don't think I'll ever give Ruby red lipstick again either. I did that to balance out the dark tones, but looking back on it, it makes her look older than she actually should look. Not older than she is. I won't fully commit to a definite age at this very instant, but Ruby's probably in her late 30s or early 40s. However, her Fae heritage made her outward aging slow once she hit her prime, so she's looked 18 for a long time now. It's probably a good thing, though, because she acts that age. Ruby's the impetuous member of the Institute for Metaphysical and I will always screw up this word. Phenomenological Studies. The Institute for Metaphysical and Phenomenological Studies. Or IMPS. IMPS is a lot easier to say. She grew up with a temperamental mother who possessed a great deal of disdain for humanity, and a human father who was very strict in an attempt to give Ruby half a chance at functioning in human society. Plus, when your kid can start fires at will and their mother encourages that, well, parenting is going to be different, and encouraging self-control becomes way more important than just saving yourself the embarrassment of your kid's outbursts. Ruby is the usually on-again, sometimes off-again girlfriend of Labyrinth, by the way. You may remember me drawing him a while back in my 4 Tips to Combat Artist Block video. They both work for IMPS, and Ruby's dad is their boss, so that's a fun balancing act for Labyrinth. Ruby also had a stint as a fledgling superhero, calling herself Fire Brat when she was younger, a name she's desperately trying to distance herself from now that she's an adult. Okay, what else is worth mentioning about this art? The dress turned out really well. This was my first time trying to add a watercolor pattern to clothing. I didn't want the pattern to look really crisp because I think that kind of detail would pull the eye away from Ruby herself. So I used a lot of wet on wet to get the general impression of flowers without actually rendering them. Wet on wet is when you brush a lot of water onto the page before you add your watercolor to it. This makes the paint bleed and spread and generally lets it go where it wants to. It gives a blurry effect, like something being out of focus, and it's also great when you want a soft gradient, like sunsets and such, if you use your brush to smooth and blend the colors together, which I didn't so much do here in the pattern. In the top flame especially, I used the wet on wet technique, but get a harsher, crisper edge by adding a lot of strong color and not pulling it or blending it with the brush at all. That's the really exciting part of working with watercolor. When you do something abstract and natural like fire, and just let the water take the color where it wants to go. When you're younger, that lack of control of your art can feel scary or frustrating. But now that I'm an adult, I'm genuinely curious as to how it'll turn out, and like the excitement of not being able to predict it in advance. I will say that wet in wet is probably not the best technique to do on 98-pound mixed media paper. It buckles the paper something fierce because, although it can absolutely accept wet media well, it's not made for buckets of water. I like using mixed media paper because it's not super expensive, but if I want the option of using watercolor, I can do it. And it can accept wet into wet. I just have to tear it out and flatten it later if I want to frame it or get a really good scan. For the metallic highlights in the end, I use Kuretake Gansai Starry Colors watercolor paints. I use Shirogane, which is white gold for an undercoat, where I want the metallic colors to go, so that hopefully they'll look a little brighter, and Awagane, which I have no clue what awa means and can't find a definition online, as the top coat, the color I actually want the metal to appear as. And before someone tells me that awa means bubbles or foam, that's true, but the Chinese character or kanji on the box doesn't match the kanji for the word foam. Japanese is a complex language, folks. Also, be forewarned that while these paints are awesome and I recommend them, all the packaging is in Japanese. So the colors from left to right, if you want to label them yourself, are blue gold, red gold, yellow gold, peach gold, whatever awa means gold, and white gold. You'll see Ruby again very soon in an even better drawing. It's black and white, and I'll be posting it on the 1st. We'll talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and I'll read part of her mom's moderately unnerving origin story. It'll be good times, so you should subscribe and join us. And, of course, likes and comments are much appreciated. You can let me know what you thought of the art, if I have any art questions you can answer, or if you want me to draw more of this character in the comments. Or anything else you want to say. I like having conversations down there. Ruby is another Ascension Epoch character, and will appear in future East End Irregular books and short stories. There are currently 2 East End Irregulars books available, and while Ruby isn't in them, you can still get your fill of cute red-headed fire starters in them with our heroine Corona. She's just much more moderately tempered. Have an awesome day, folks, and until next time, Presto, over and out. Oh, this won't do at all, Priggies. What good are wings when you're afraid of heights? I feel very, very silly, Priggies. Oh, that's nice. Maybe if you give me some fishes, I can grant you some wishes.